of course. And speaking of which, Mike Davis, our next man up, because of course we're talking about next man up this week, joins us next from the Article 3 Project. By the way, Mike, it was nice. People don't know that we actually I got to run security for you at the Supreme Court the other day when you had a hit and there were some protesters. I guess something happened with the security detail this morning over at Danbury, because nobody seemed to know, and nobody seemed to know how to deal with those protesters with Steve. But a great example of what I was able to do when you were doing your hit for Bannon, and I just happened to be there, talked to the guy, and I used my conversational skills and used the Jedi mind tricks to walk them out of the shot so they weren't able to scream traitor and all the rest while you were going off. Real quick though, were you in any way surprised from the 6-3 decision today on presidential immunity?
Not at all, and I knew it was coming, and we've been predicting it's coming on your show and other shows, because think about what the alternative would have been. If you don't have presidential immunity from criminal prosecution for your official acts as the president of the United States, you're going to destroy the presidency and therefore destroy the country. And that was very clear several months ago at the Supreme Court's oral arguments, that the Supreme Court understood that very well. You heard Justice Kavanaugh asking those questions about can the Trump 47 Justice Department prosecute President Obama for capital murder, for ordering an extrajudicial drone strike on 2 American citizens, including a minor? Can the Trump 47 Justice Department prosecute President Biden for his illegal mass parole of over 10 million illegal immigrants into our country and the resulting violent crimes? Can the Trump 47 Justice Department, to be bipartisan, prosecute George W. Bush for lying about weapons of mass destruction and the resulting deaths of hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq? We just cannot go down this path as a country. We're not going to become a third world Marxist hellhole, and 6 justices on the Supreme Court understood that very well. Frankly, this should have been 9-0. Those liberal justices are partisan hacks. There's no question they would have ruled the other way if President Biden instead of President Trump were the party on this case.
So in response to this, I'm now seeing there's a steady stream, by the way, coming in. You've got leftists openly calling for drone strikes on Mar-a-Lago. They're openly calling for assassinations to be ordered of President Trump by SEAL Team 6. Justice Sotomayor, of course, actually mentions this in her own dissent. Justice Sotomayor, with her room temperature IQ over there, putting this out. And then people are even calling, I'm starting to see now tweets calling for the assassination of the justices themselves. Mike Davis, walk us through this. Can the president just openly order the assassination of political rivals now?
No, that's insane. They're not I see you have Bradley Moss up there, this third-tier employment lawyer who thinks he's a constitutional scholar now. So I don't know if he's deluded himself into believing that, but this guy's a joke. But I would say this, you have to look at the Chief Justice, certainly no MAGA warrior. I've never seen Chief Justice John Roberts wear a MAGA hat, ever. But I would say this, if you look at how the Supreme Court ruled, they said that there is absolute immunity when you're dealing with the president's core constitutional functions, like, for example, contemplating firing one of your cabinet officials, like Jack Smith put in his indictment of President Trump. That's absolutely immune. And then you have presumptive immunity for all other official acts. The Supreme Court pointed out when President Trump tried to put pressure on Vice President Pence to not certify the election, that's presumptively immune. And then what can happen is the prosecutor can rebut that presumption with evidence that the president, that by prosecuting the president, it's not gonna cut the legs out of the presidency, is essentially what they're holding. The Supreme Court is making sure that we have a strong presidency, and this is so much bigger than Donald Trump. This is about the destruction of the presidency and therefore the destruction of our country. And so that's what the Supreme Court is making sure does not happen with these bogus political prosecutions by Biden.
As you're speaking here, I pulled up Sotomayor's dissent and some of the key lines, and people have seen the SEAL Team 6 line, which is just completely insane. But I'll read to some people this. Today's decision to grant former presidents criminal immunity reshapes the institution of the presidency. It makes a mockery of the principle that no man is above the law. Presidents could now take bribes and assassinate political opponents without being prosecuted. And the president is now a king above the law. Without fear for our democracy, I dissent. Does she actually is she actually that stupid? Is she? I'm just going to ask, right? Because
yes.
I'm not
yes.
a lawyer, I'm not a constitutional scholar. Is she actually that dumb to think that this decision affects all of those things that she just said? That it removes the impeachment power. That it by the way, it only offers partial immunity. Is she playing to an audience, which I totally understand because that's something that the left does all the time, or is she just personally that absolutely stupid?
Both. And I would say this, Justice Sotomayor reminds me of one of my aunts who I disagree with constantly. I still love her. I still love my aunt, but I disagree with her constantly. But she's not the smartest person that I've ever had a debate with. And I think that Justice Sotomayor is kind of in that camp. She's actually personally a very lovable person.
She's like this is like the rantings of a liberal wine aunt. Like this is the rantings of a liberal wine aunt who is sitting on the Supreme Court. Who, by the way, like maybe she's very nice. I believe that she and Clarence Thomas and some of the other justices actually have a pretty good relationship. But it's just this is like her posting on Facebook, and that's how people should read this.
Yeah, it's like when you're going to Christmas and you know that aunt's going to be a total pain in the ass and fight with you the entire time. And so you have to chug a bunch of alcohol before you get to the Christmas party so you can tolerate that aunt. You still love her, but you wish that she would just shut up from time to time. And that's Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She's personally a great person, but she's just wrong here, and she's dumb. She's just stupidly wrong on this case. And this is so much bigger than Donald Trump. This is about the presidency. If you let a president of the United States imprison his predecessor for what that predecessor did in his official capacity as the president of the United States, you're going to destroy our country. You're going to turn America into a third world Marxist hellhole. And maybe that's what a lot of these Democrats want, is the destruction of the presidency. So therefore, you'll get the destruction of the country. This should have been 9-0. If this were President Obama's case or President Biden's case, it would have been 9-0. But you have 3 left-wing hacks on the Supreme Court who are angry and bitter because they're going to be in a permanent minority for 95% of the cases for the rest of their life. Thank you, thank you to President Donald J. Trump. And I would say this, to the Democrats: you have guaranteed with this lawfare and election interference that President Trump is going to get reelected, and he's likely going to replace Sonia Sotomayor on the Supreme Court. So thank you very much for your service to this country with this boneheaded, Republican-ending lawfare and election interference that has backfired spectacularly.
Mike Davis, let me ask you a question. Totally shift gears here for a second. Your friend of mine, Stephen K. Bannon, walking into federal prison right now, head held high like the warrior, like the Irish warrior he is, bowing his head at one. The only time he put his head down was to receive a traditional Latin blessing. The only time Steve Bannon put his head down was for the traditional Latin blessing from the church, from the priest that they had on hand. And watching him go in there, let me ask you this. So we know that the emergency injunction for Steve Bannon's imprisonment was denied. He does still have his appeal that goes up on executive privilege grounds. Is there any chance that could come up during the 4 months that he's in and he might be out earlier?
I doubt it. And I would say this to the courts: you have really dropped the ball on this one, because this is so much bigger than Steve Bannon. You have 2 former top presidential advisors sitting in prison right now: Peter Navarro, who was the White House trade director, and Steve Bannon, who was one of President Trump's top outside presidential advisors, are in prison right now for objecting to a congressional subpoena on constitutional executive privilege grounds, constitutional executive privilege that has gone back 250 years to George Washington to make sure that presidents can get candid advice from their advisors without being hauled in before courts or Congress to disclose that advice, because we want to protect the presidency. And these federal courts, these D.C. judges, the D.C. District Court, the D.C. Court of Appeals, they are left-wing partisan hacks, Obama and Biden, Democrat partisan judges, and weak Republican judges largely on these D.C. courts. And so the Supreme Court should have stepped in for both Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon, because guess what? If you could put a presidential advisor in prison for raising an objection under constitutional executive privilege, we're going to destroy our presidency. I would think that the Chief Justice and Justice Kavanaugh would understand that, especially after they just issued that great presidential immunity ruling. And remember that this is going to come back and bite the Democrats in the ass, because remember there was Hunter Biden who did his drive-by press conference in front of Congress and was contempt of Congress, and not a damn thing happens from Merrick Garland. And Merrick Garland is held in contempt of Congress after he released the transcript of Special Counsel Robert Hur's interview of President Biden, but Garland refused to release the tape. We found out why at the debate, because Biden is such a disaster and they didn't want it to get out. Garland raised a frivolous claim of executive privilege. He released the transcript, so he can't claim that the tape is somehow covered after he released the transcript. He had his Justice Department, Garland had his Justice Department get him a get out of jail free card. I guarantee you that card's not going to be valid come January 20th, 2025, when the Trump 47 Justice Department arrests him and charge him with contempt of Congress along with Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden has no claim of constitutional executive privilege, but the Attorney General might. But guess what? He's going to face severe legal, political, and financial consequences after January 20th. And part of that is Merrick Garland must be held accountable for his contempt. They must bring criminal charges. In the meantime, the House Republicans must hold Garland in inherent contempt of Congress, order the House Sergeant at Arms to go get him and put him in the Capitol jail cell until Merrick Garland complies with the subpoena by turning over that tape of Rob Hur with President Biden. Nobody's above the law, Merrick Garland says, and all these Democrats say, and we know that's not true under the Biden Justice Department.
Oh, no one is above the law. No one is above the law. Yeah, well, how about the dreamers then? How about illegal aliens? So if no one is above the law, it's a joke, but you can of course throw that around again and again on the left, because they're the ones who are constantly breaking the law, and they run over and they'll say, "Oh, you didn't file your paperwork correctly. Off to jail with you." Look, I think, and let me ask you this while I have you on, because look, from the I know this is something you and I have talked about at length. You and Steve talked about this a lot at length too. Joe Biden collapses at the debate, calls for Joe Biden to come out, Steve Bannon put behind the gulag. How much pressure will there be now on Judge Juan Merchan to give President Trump a jail sentence, one which Steve Bannon predicts will be multi-year?
I think that's going to happen, and there's no question about it. This was a partisan, corrupt, rigged process. This Judge Juan Merchan is corrupt. His adult daughter, Laura Merchan, was raising millions of dollars off of this unprecedented criminal trial over which he presided. That requires Judge Merchan's recusal under New York statute. That's not just crazy Mike Davis saying that. A former Clinton judge, federal judge from New York, said that on Caitlin Collins' show on CNN on April 5th when Trump raised this evidence that Merchan needed to recuse. How did he respond? Judge Merchan threatened to throw Trump in jail if Trump mentioned Lauren Merchan's name. This guy is corrupt. This guy is partisan. There's no question he's going to order Trump to incarceration. And President Trump will file a habeas petition, I presume, a 2241 habeas petition in the federal courts. He'll also file, I presume, an emergency petition through the New York courts. But I would say this, that there's no way in hell that this Supreme Court of the United States is going to let this Soros-funded Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, this former Obama and Biden operative.
Completely insane. Mike, we're just about out of time. Give people your coordinates real quick, man.
Article3project.org, article number 3project.org.